Okay, friends, this is really such a joy, and it has been really a delight to really gather with friends and talk out loud among ourselves about things that I genuinely believe are what the Talmud describes, Devarim ha'omdim berumo shel olam, matters that are really celestial and divine. The reason why I say that is because what this is really about is our own humanity, our own lives. And that is why this final session, which is about is AI the new printing press? What are the preparations we should be making to confront this new world? My mind immediately goes to the way social media affected the way humans interact, the way that we talk to one another, and the way that we speak to one another. But I wanted to begin by just on a very basic level, to start with each to hear a little bit about how you have already, if you have, begun changing your work, things around your life with the advent of AI. And I wanted to start with Malka.
Just a reminder that we don't get the questions in advance, so thank you, David. I appreciate that. And this has been a phenomenal conference, so I really appreciate that as well. When people ask me about AI, I think about it from the perspective of an author and a researcher, and also from the perspective of an editor. And all of the things I'm going to share over the next hour or so are anecdotal. I don't have data. I'm not AI, and I'm not a professional at a serious foundation. I just speak from anecdotal experience. And my experience suggests that there's huge panic in academia right now, and also stagnancy as a psychological response to what's happening with AI. I was sharing in our group yesterday that I have a colleague in academia who put into ChatGPT a request. He said to ChatGPT, use my own scholarship, and he put in his name, to write a new article on a topic that I'm an expert on in the voice of Malcolm Gladwell. And what ChatGPT put out was so outstanding and so intriguing and well-written with such a good introductory hook that my friend said, I am never writing again. And he has not written anything since. This was about 9 months ago. He said, I'm done. I'll teach and I'll engage with my community, but I will not write anymore. It's simply not worth my time. The algorithm has exceeded my own creative capacity. And that is one extreme, but I don't think he's alone. And on the other hand, you have maybe the older generation academics who are refusing to use AI, and as many of us over the past 2 days have said, and I agree, that's maybe myopic and unrealistic to say I can get through the next however many decades of my career and just ignore the thing. I don't think that that's wise or practical or beneficial to those academics, but you have those on the other extreme as well. The big question is going to be what happens to those of us in the middle who want to use AI as a tool, but also want to think that we have capacity for our own creative ideas and that we have something unique to contribute. I ask myself this question very often, but I've tricked myself into thinking that I do have something unique to contribute. And if you think that sincerely as an academic, you have to work outside of AI before you go to it as a tool.
Tikvah?
Okay. So thank you. This has been amazing, David. So thank you. So for the past 10 years, I've been focused on something called student-centered learning, which is trying to change education so that students have greater agency in the classroom. And it involves a lot of different components. It's not one thing. It's not one approach. You have to do a whole bunch of shifts. You have to make a whole bunch of mindset shifts, even within the teacher, and even within the students, and also within the parents who sometimes are like, well, I did it this way, right? I walked uphill both ways in the snow, right? You've got to do it this way. What do you mean, right? You're going to be working groups. I see in one of our group chats today, a parent is complaining there's too much group work. What do I say? Right? So we have to think about whenever we change education, which seems to be a very slow field to change, especially Jewish education, we have to be aware of who else are we bringing along and how can we bring them along in ways that they can understand and are comfortable with. For me, in my work, which is to provide student-centered learning, professional development to Jewish day schools, it's a mouthful, we're already seeing just how easy AI makes that work. If you're any kind of educator, general or Jewish educator, you can see how differentiating lessons can be made much easier using AI tools. But there's so much that you can do. They're literal, if you go to Conmigo, which is Khan Academy's AI platform, or Magic School, there are so many tools you can use as an educator. So one thing that's already become like de rigueur in our workshops is like, okay, so how are you using, the AI tools for you? And then, of course, the conversation shifts to how are the kids using AI tools. So one podcaster, Angela Watson, she does Truth for Teachers. She's like, I see this dystopia where all the kids are writing essays using AI and all the teachers are grading them using AI, right? So she's like, well, how do we prevent that from happening? So what are the guardrails that we need to put up so that that's not happening? But how? I mean, to Malka's very real point is like, how do we quell the panic among faculty, right, who are feeling threatened by this new technology, and how do we help them adapt to this world where it actually is an amazing tool? Like, I can't tell you how fast I can do some things that just took so long without it, and make student-centered learning so much easier, giving the kids agency. So I would hate to go back to a time where, like, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when everyone flooded the schools with iPads and there was zero plan. I promise you, if that was like, I'm pulling the veil away from, some schools, there was no plan, people, right? And a lot of times the iPad ended up in the drawer, right? Both for teacher and student. So and now we know that the iPads were maybe a bad idea because there was no plan. So how do we go into this new technology with a plan? Okay, there's a teacher who really doesn't want to use it. You know what? You're the administrator. Have the whole plan for the school, right? Make a plan. You ban cell phones. That's freedom from. What's freedom to? How is it a proactive plan, and that you're moving everyone along with you? And that's what I would love to see happen really in the field.
Moshe, and I was wondering if you could speak to the first two responses. It's something that I share as well, and I mentioned it last night, like the genuine panic, almost like the fear of watching a computer do what you have spent your entire life distinguishing yourself. And for me, that is the development of ideas, the honing of ideas, and the sharing of ideas. And then all of a sudden you can put in a prompt, and it's much faster, and a lot of the writing can be excellent. It's not always perfect, but it can be excellent. When you hear that angst, how do you relate, as somebody involved within the Jewish community, within specifically AI, what is your position on the panic and the angst that people feel when they see the magnitude of what is coming?
I think that angst is completely justified. I think what's coming in terms of people's sense of self-worth, of finding, those people, which is most people, who find meaning through the creative work that they do, I think this is going to be an absolute catastrophe. I think the number one problem that we're facing as we go, we've got plenty of time here. We're going to talk about other catastrophes.
All of a sudden, this chair feels like it's 30 feet high, and I'm wobbling about to fall. But keep going.
I think that there are many potential dangers from AI, but I'm not a crazy doomer. But the one issue that I think is most frightening to me is the fact that most people will have absolutely nothing to do with themselves, and I'm not talking about people whose jobs are drudgery in the first place, and they would be perfectly happy to be relieved of them. I'm talking about people who are doing creative work and interesting work and find satisfaction in it. Young people will not be in those professions. Okay, whether it's law, computer programming, medicine, education, you name it, all the white collar stuff. It's not that the people who are currently there are going to get fired. It's that the people who are up and coming and learning those things now are not going to get hired. And I'm not talking about the economic effects of this, which I think are minor, okay? I think that the real effects are psychological in terms of people's sense of purpose and meaning in life. This is going to be an absolute catastrophe.
So I want to build on that and continue. I remember there was something that got a great deal of news attention as the popularity of the internet began to spread, and specifically within the Jewish community, there was something that has become known as the Asifa. The Asifa. Asifa is a Hebrew word meaning gathering, and they rented out a baseball stadium and filled it mostly from within the Hasidic community, talking about the dangers of the internet. Now, a lot of people like to chuckle, oh, the Hasidim are putting their heads underground, but there was some truth about the way that the internet was going to revolutionize and change society. If you were to imagine an Asifa for the Jewish community in the coming of AI, what should be discussed? What do you think is the broad messaging if you filled a baseball stadium with Jews from all stripes and all backgrounds who are concerned about this question? What would you hope the messaging, what do you think the messaging should be specifically to the broader Jewish community about what we should be working on right now with the advent of AI around the corner?
You're asking Malka?
Oh, no, he was not.
Are you trying to punt it?
I was punting. That was me punting very inelegantly. Yeah. All right. I've had 3 seconds to think about that very fanciful question. First of all, if most of the people in that Asifa had 2 phones in their pockets, okay? Leman Yishmun, Leman Yiron, as they say, right? You know, for those who didn't get it, you have your dumb phone so that people will see it, and your smartphone so that you can actually hear what you want to hear. Let me tell you about an interesting study, okay? So I don't remember who did this. I don't think it was Jonathan Haidt, but it's a kind of a Jonathan Haidt kind of study, okay? They asked people, how much would we have to pay you for you to go off social media for a month? And, you know, they said, oh, no, a lot of money, right? I don't know, whatever, a few $100s on average. Then they said, how much would we have to pay you for you and all your friends to go off social media for a month? They said, we'd pay you, okay? People are not happy about being on social media. They don't actually enjoy it, but they feel they have to do it because all their friends are doing it, and if they don't do it, they'll just be out of it. Social media has not served us well, okay? The question is, what about AI? I think AI is different. I mean, I get tremendous benefit from AI, but sometimes, let me distinguish between 2 cases. You asked how we personally use AI. I didn't answer that question. I sometimes use AI to essentially in the way that I was using Google until now, except it's better, right? I'm looking for information instead of, putting in a search term in Google. I kind of ask it in question form to Claude, and I get back, a much better answer, and that's really useful. Sometimes, I do things that I would never have done otherwise because it's too complicated, right? I want to know like which individual baseball statistics correlate best with runs scored when you look at the team statistics. It's if anybody wants to know the answer to this, if you take, are you into baseball?
I'm not, but I'm fascinated that you are.
Oh, I'm a nut. So if you take OPS, which is slugging plus on-base percentage, and you divide that by 1 minus on-base percentage, okay, You multiply that by 6 and subtract 2, that is the amount of runs a player is worth, okay? If anybody's a baseball fan here, mark that down. This is the greatest
A lot of head nods around the crowd.
Greatest
A lot of
baseball
nodding.
statistic insight ever, okay? Yeah, AI does important stuff. But let me tell you how I usually use AI and how it actually, for the most part, does more harm than good. For me, I wish I would stop doing it. When I'm writing an essay or something like that, what I used to do is just sit down and write an essay. I was pretty good at it, okay? Now I write kind of like something between an outline and the full text, I just kind of throw it down fast and I don't bother. And then I say, here, clean this up, all right? Okay, and then I iterate because it cleans it up and I'm not quite happy and it doesn't quite sound like me, and I iterate a bunch of times. And by the time I'm finished iterating, A, it has taken me more time than if I would have just thought it through a little bit better and written it myself, and B, it doesn't sound like me, okay? So that's one of the main uses I have for it, and it's bad. It actually is harmful. It saves me nothing, and it makes things worse.
Do you want to jump in, Tikvah?
Yeah, if I were to do the ASIFA, I think what I would say is this. I hear what Moshe's saying when people say it's really bad. It like makes my, get me like that sick feeling in your stomach, right? Like, oh my God, what's coming? Okay, I'm a big acolyte of Rabbi Sacks, and Rabbi Sacks was not a person who spent time in despair. He talked about having hope, right? Which is, it's also been meaningful because that is my name. That hope is an action verb, okay? And so I think we all live in a time, AI is one thing, but obviously post-October 7th, all the anti-Semitism, everything that's going on in the world, I think we're living in just very challenging times, and I don't think it's helpful to live in that fear. And when we make decisions out of fear, we tend to make bad decisions. So I think if I were gathering the Jewish people, I would remind them that we've been in places that have challenged our notion of what it means to be human before, right? You named your podcast 1840, right? I think of the 19th century. There's so much literature around, like, what can you imagine being a Jew and Charles Darwin comes out with Origin of Species? You're like, oh my God, what about Bereshit, right? Like, and of course we have all the responsa now, and we dealt with it, and now we're like, right, we just, Rav Kook, we just built we expanded the Palace of Torah around that, and who knows what a day is, and right, and we made it work, and actually we're thriving. And I think about, even this morning about the fact that like the virality of anti-Semitism on AI. Well, anti-Semitism has always been called a virus, and was it built in? Yes, it was, because even like the early biblical critics who threatened Judaism were doing it from anti-Jewish places because they felt, right, Judaism was not, Christ had to come and fix Judaism because it was bad. So we've been in places before where things have felt destabilizing. And I would say let's learn the lesson also of not just the iPads, but of social media. Now Haidt did this research for us, right? And we know how bad it was. I don't know if you heard Governor Cox a few days ago, and he called them the conflict entrepreneurs. They knew what they were unleashing on us. Let's not be prey for them. Let's not be. I love this conference because you're being proactive. You're saying let's not be prey, and the faith-based communities have such an important role to play here in saying we have this thing, right, called the Torah, where everything we do, we integrate it with it. So if we're talking about human dignity, we're all the more so. Kal vachomer, we're talking about it with AI because it's literally that. So I think if I were gathering one, I would remind us of that and not to live in the darkness.
I really appreciate that, Malka. I'm curious specifically from your vantage point as a historian who has watched the community respond to some really massive changes in the community. If you were given the microphone at this imagined gathering, the Asifa, and we have the baseball stadium and all the Jews are there, where would you call their attention historically of what you see as a constructive response to dramatic Jewish change?
It's a great question, and before I answer that, like any good academic, I have to indirectly address the question. And I just think it's interesting because the premise of a lot of our conversations over the past 2 days has been, is AI good or is AI bad? Obviously, we're not going to get to that answer, and there's a lot of variety in this room, but I wonder about the extent to which we're just projecting our own natures and personalities, and extent to which we're a room of optimists and realists and pessimists, mostly the last. But when we're thinking about AI and the future, and is humankind going to inevitably improve, I think that we can't get beyond our kind of natural disposition when it comes to the nature of humankind. And that's the case when we talk about AI. And it's also the case when we talk to AI. And we are asking or expecting an affable, agreeable, affirming entity that will essentially tell us that everything we say is correct, but here's a better way to say it. I don't know if we're going to get to a point soon where AI will start arguing with us and being more combative, and how that will change our relationship. But I just want to say that I think a lot of this is coming from our own dispositions. And maybe there are fewer optimists in this room than I thought. But here's an answer to your question. A lot of people like to talk about writing as technology, and in ancient times, people started to write, and this threw the world into upheaval. I actually think that the second great technological development in this early history is more important, and that development, anyone want to guess, is mail. It's highways. It's what the Persians did at the end of the 6th century BCE and into the 5th century BCE when they built roads for the postal system for the emperor. Because when the Persians built those highways and used it specifically to dispatch edicts and official statements of the emperor, suddenly people were held accountable to a higher voice than their very local homes, neighborhoods, and immediate communities. And now they had to think about a world beyond their immediate reality. Of course, this is way before there was any social media, but the mail was the social media. And now they had to contend with very big questions about human freedom and accountability, and whether they had a unique contribution to make, knowing that there was a higher authority that they had to answer to in a much more immediate way. Of course, there were always rulers and emperors that people were living under, but with the mail system, there was a closer connectivity and a sense of more immediate obligation to the host country under which they were living. And I think mail is a very interesting thing, because it makes us think about the people beyond that we'll never have immediate connection with, but maybe they're producing something that threatens us, or maybe they're producing something that perfectly aligns with us, and therefore we actually don't have anything new to contribute. Now, I think that there must have been some panic when mail started to show up, but I also think that the Jews living under Persian rule in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE used it as an incredible opportunity. I wouldn't say to take control of their narrative, but certainly Jews responded right away with this technology to produce their own writings and to disseminate those writings. The end of the book of Esther is a great example of this, but it's one of many examples of Jews writing and dispatching and transposing and sharing and translating. It's not a mistake that the end of Esther provides a lot of detail about this dissemination and the reaches and the extent to which these letters made their way through this vast empire. This is what Jews have done for centuries. They have faced these massive changes with resilience and creativity. And I don't want to be too optimistic. It would be against my nature. But I will just say that that the willingness of the Jewish community under Persian rule to adopt this technology and then incorporate it into their own frameworks of thinking really ensured their survival and their unity.
Well, I really love that example, and that's absolutely, really, really, truly fascinating. One thing that I've been thinking about is the way that the human body reacts when it loses one of its senses. God forbid somebody who does not have sight, so their sense of hearing is magnified. They're able to focus, perhaps, much more clearly on the different noises and sounds that are taking place. When you think of AI, and we all spoke about how it's really changed the act of writing and creative activities, what are the senses that you hope are going to be magnified? What is the training and the specific types of skills that we need to magnify in an era when certain types of thinking, certain types of writing are no longer going to be where we're getting the exercise? I'd like to start with Tikvah.
Yeah, sure. When I mentioned before, like the student-centered learning, it's a whole host of things that you do. So if you're standing in front of the room and suddenly ChatGPT can do that better, can provide the information better, whatnot, then you have a problem. But one of the things that we do a lot is teach the Socratic seminar, which actually popped up a few times here. We ended up in different Socratic seminars because we're Jews. We have to, right? We have to like talk and discuss, right? So during lunch or, in our facilitation groups, when you give students agency and you teach them how to have conversations, I think that is actually the antidote to social media and in even AI. Because what you're doing is you're saying, I need you to bring these texts, because it has to be evidence-based, it has to be text-based, right? So you're teaching them how to do the research. You have to show them, they have to know, they have to come to a conversation with knowledge and skills, right? And then they have to discuss and take on someone else's perspective. And a Socratic seminar is not a debate. It's not a zero-sum game, right? Malka is a pessimist. I'm an optimist. I don't want to debate Malka about who's better, because that's a zero-sum game. I want to say, I need Malka's perspective, because you know yourself. You are going to get too high. Like, you need someone to like puncture the balloon sometimes, right? So all of us in this room have a perspective, and that I was thinking about that yesterday in terms of like what does it mean to be human? I think some of it is we need each other, and that's part of what's ailing us about social media, and it's going to ail us too about AI if we don't let it. And so having students collaborate, communicate, be creative with each other, I think is the perfect antidote to AI, which is saying, just let me do it all for you. And you as a teacher can now say, no, actually, I need you to be in this room and present and bring all of you, right, to this conversation.
Moshe, I'm curious, when you think about the specific skills from your vantage point, I'm sure everyone's asking you from a professional point of view, what are the AI-proof industries? I am curious about that, but I'm much more curious from your vantage point about the specific human skills that we should be magnifying and developing further along the lines of what Tikvah just shared. When you think of the skills and the specific, human-centric qualities that we possess, which are the ones that you think are in most need of development?
Okay, let me start by talking about the ones that I think are most threatened. I like, Malka, your nail example. I'll tell you why. Here's a way to think about what happened then. We used to live in tribes, essentially, okay? Not just, in the Amazon, but people for, thousands of years ago lived in communities that consisted of a few hundred people, and altruism was enough in order to keep those tribes functioning reasonably well. What happened when you had things like mail and roads, etc., the size of the so-called community that you were dealing with was much larger, okay? And there's a magic number called the Dunbar number, right, which is somewhere around 175. Once you're in a group that has more than the Dunbar number of people in it, altruism no longer functions in order to, is sufficiently to keep the society together. And you need essentially to develop social norms, in particular norms regarding commerce and so forth, that make it possible for people who don't have any kind of kinship relationship with each other to be able to function as a society. So in fact, everything that we call social norms, right, developed as a result of communities getting bigger, because of things like transportation and communication that developed. What's happening now is that first of all, among other things, transportation and communication are becoming much more refined, right? So that essentially you can be talking now with billions of people, and that's what's going. And what we need to do is develop new social norms that are appropriate for billions of people. It's a completely different thing. The communities that we have now are generally divided along other lines than we're accustomed to. Once it was proximity, and then after that it was say proximity, but in a much larger scale, or commercial interest, et cetera. Now people are dividing up into virtual communities where, you're in the community of left-handed knitters, and things like that. We did not evolve as human beings. Our minds did not evolve for this kind of a society. So we're going to have to develop appropriate social norms in order for us to be able to function in this kind of society, and I don't think that we're going that it's possible for those norms develop very slowly. They evolve, and the speed with which these changes are happening is a completely different scale than the scale at which norms can evolve. So just the two things that I think are going to go, aside from what I already mentioned, that are going to go very bad for us, and for which we need to work desperately to catch up on, are one, attenuated social skills, right? The fact of the matter is that they're getting worse. Social skills are getting worse, okay? If people are interacting with virtual whatevers, right? Or if they're just walking around with their faces in their phones all day, this makes their social skills worse, okay? Also, intellectual skills are going to get worse for reasons similar to what I was describing in my process of, we get lazy, okay? Instead of thinking things through, we kind of outsource to AI to think instead of us. Now, what happens when you do that, it's like, right, what happened when you got Waze, okay, right? Probably you, like me, if you were driving from here home, you would kind of look at the map, and after like a minute looking at the map, you more or less knew how to get there. You might get stuck in traffic, to be fair, but you knew how to get there, right? Now with Waze, I don't know about you, but I could tell you that, like, if I drive to the corner, I turn on Waze. I don't know why I do that, but it's like I can't get anywhere without Waze. Like my phone isn't working for some reason, and I've got to get like from here to there. I'm going, how am I going to get there? People used to do it. Like 3 years ago. I don't know, 10 years ago. So the same thing, of course, is going to happen with our intellectual abilities, because we're farming them out. So we are losing essential skills, and at the same time, we are fundamentally changing the way the people we interact with and the way we interact with them and so forth. And as I said, I think we are going to have to evolve norms that regulate the way we do these things so that they don't end up catastrophically. And I don't think that we are going to be able to do that in time.
That is absolutely fascinating and brought back some really pleasant and also frustrating memories of my father having a map open trying to find how to get to New Hampshire. And when I was dating, the shift was taking place as I was dating. I began dating in the MapQuest era, where you had to print out directions how to get from your house to the person you were dating's house, to the location, then back to her house, then back to your house. And it was I came with a file cabinet on every date. Pass me folder number 3. One thing that I have been thinking about for the last year and a half is, I'll share this. It's not really embarrassment. It's really a point of pride. Is that I have been involved in group therapy, group work. I've definitely been in therapy as a younger one-on-one, but for the last year and a half, I've been involved in group therapy. And the focus of group therapy is to have people sit around and really only focus and communicate the immediacy of their own experience. What are you feeling right now? It's not about digging up childhood. It's not about, and it's transformed the way that I teach and the way that I interact because I'm able to pay attention much closer. And what I have found that AI, if anything, has taught me how to articulate what I want, which is a really incredible skill. I think a lot of people go through life, they may have some vague idea of what makes them nervous or what makes them anxious or maybe even what makes them happy, but they have a very hard time articulating what exactly do you want. And I look at AI as an exercise in that, and in some ways group therapy being an antidote of learning how to articulate the immediate, what am I feeling right now? People don't often know how to do that. And I'm curious, and I want to really turn it over to Malka, specifically the pessimist. I'm curious when you, by your own admission.
I mean, not worse than Moshe, but.
Yeah. but you have spent a really impressive career in the academic world. Now you are the editor of a major historic Jewish publisher, JPS. And I'm curious for you, where is your mind going for your own self-development? Where are you thinking, where am I going to be useful next? And like on a very like personal level, like what are the skills that you are trying to grasp and hold on to more now that so much of what you've spent your career doing has radically changed?
Wow. That's a huge question, and I'm not going to bore you with all my feelings about the 2nd century BCE, but in a broader sense, I think that one thing that right now AI doesn't do well is express doubt and humility. When you ask AI a question, it might invite you to refine the question, and that could be a good skill for you cognitively to really think about what you're trying to say, what you're feeling and thinking. But what AI will ultimately give you, likely, is a highly confident answer that leaves you, maybe not you, but leaves one with a sense that they've reached kind of the objective threshold of truth. AI, in that sense, is very unhuman because when we're in dialogue with another individual or we're in conversation with a community, you can gauge, even if you're speaking over Zoom, facial features, body language, intonations, hesitation, doubt, and also all those infinite gradations of humility in between. And then you have many more tools of discernment to assess critically whether you're going to accept that, that information that you have received. AI right now is not very insecure. Now, it could be that over time it will become more humanized and say, I think, but I'm not sure that this is my answer, but also I advise you to go to Claude and Grok. So that's not where it is right now. But I think going back to what Tikvah said, one advantage that we might have over AI is that when we're engaging as one individual with this voiceless voice, that's a one-to-one interaction and really cannot mimic the distinctive, unique dynamics that are formed between all the individuals in this room as a unique community, unless they start talking to each other. And then I'm as worried as Moshe, I guess. But right now, the communities that we can build, I think, give us a leg up. And in those interactions, we see all the nuances of human expression that right now, I would say, we're not finding in AI.
Tikva, I'd like to hear a little bit building on that specifically within the context. I know we spoke a little bit about it yesterday, the context of Jewish schools. You do quite a bit of coaching with teachers and with administrators talking about the direction of schools. What do you hope? I mean, I've seen curricula for teaching social emotional learning. I've seen all these tests, and I honestly, anytime I see a new curriculum, I look at it with a little bit of skepticism. Like, it's hard to have lesson one, how to be polite and nice at past, the kindergarten age. And I'm curious, what do you think is the direction schools need to be going in a very specific way now that it's no longer the place where you have access to information? What are schools building if not the place? They're not libraries anymore. You can have that on your home computer. What do you want to see developing further in Jewish schools to respond to the skills that we need most in the era of AI?
Yeah, so when we work, we don't really work with curricula. We'll take any curricula or any hashkafa that a school has, and we'll say, okay, how can we help make your school more student-centered, right? So it doesn't really matter what the content and skills are. You can just tell us, like, this is the content I want to teach in this grade. These are the skills I want to develop. What we'll actually then encourage is, okay, so how are you also developing the skills of collaboration, communication, creativity, all these, the social skills? How are you actually embedding social and emotional learning into the curricula? Okay, well, if I'm having a conversation with someone, I need to learn, I shouldn't actually interrupt them. And to your point about group therapy, which is I need to learn how to listen to somebody else, right? Because that's actually the thing that is ailing society as a whole, right? Is I just want to lob things over to you on social media, watch them explode, and then walk away, right? So these are the kinds of things that we're working with schools, and the way that we generally work is there's like this, kind of like one and done often philosophy of professional development where I'm just gonna, someone exciting and fun is gonna come and like jump on a table. I literally was in a workshop like that, and he's amazing. I don't know if any of you have seen Ron Clark. He's incredible, but that doesn't teach me how to go take how to do all of this into my particular class, into my particular classroom. And that's certainly true for Judaic studies, where you can have a plethora of resources in general studies. You want to look up Socratic Seminar in 10th and 11th grade, American history or English, whatever it is, there are millions of answers you'll get. That's not the case in Judaic studies, right? So how do we help everyone in a Jewish school move that forward? And really, that's the how is really what we're concerned with, right? Is how are you teaching so that the kids are getting the skills that they need to succeed in this world? And I don't think that, I think also if you look at what happened in Utah, what's been happening with school shootings, you're seeing the most vulnerable people in our population and that we're not serving them, right? You see people who have gone very, very astray, and those are the canaries in the coal mine, right? Those are the extremes. So it makes me think, like, what are we doing, not just with social, I agree with you, like the social emotional curricula, or like, is it an add-on? Are you just like, okay, so once a week we're gonna talk about our feelings? Is that really gonna do the trick with everything that's going on in the world? It's like, no, to your point, school should be a place where I really learn how to live in this new world. And so I need many more things than just, how to read Shakespeare. But I want to give a shout out to the Tikvah Fund, because I think also in and what Malka is saying is, I do think we need knowledge. I still think we need to teach the students how to your point, to make it hard. Like, no, it's worth it to invest in this difficult text, because you're going to get something out of it as a human, right? And we as Jews really value that, right? So I think that it has to be this kind of wholesale, philosophy, whole-scale philosophy of like, what are we doing in our schools?
Moshe, when you listen and think, your full-time job while you educate, you are not a Jewish educator first and foremost. Or at all. You've educated me, so you've educated some people. But When you think about the Jewish schooling system, particularly in the United States, where there's been so much talk about the cost of Jewish education, and we all instinctively know, if you grow up embodied within the Jewish community, that schools serve not just a function of the information and not just social emotional learning, but they kind of build the culture of the community that springs up around it. What advice would you give from your sitting point about the direction or maybe some of the blind spots that schools may have in the way they need to rethink the Jewish educational experience?
Okay, this is like way out of my area of expertise at all, but I did go to yeshiva in New York. So look, I sent my kids to the closest school that had heat in the winter. I'm not. I don't think you learn anything in school. I didn't learn anything in school. Whatever I ever learned, it's just because I was interested and I learned it. One thing that I find crazy, but that's because my kids went to school in Israel and they actually got a pretty decent education. Is I keep hearing, I mean, you probably all know this, that that these schools like charge an arm and a leg, and there's like the which school should you go in your gap year in Israel director that has a whole staff under them and all this kind of crap. What is this? I mean, I went to school. I went to Chavetz Chaim. There's 25 guys in the class. They got some teacher from public school to come in the afternoon and teach us whatever they taught us. Okay, and there was one principal, completely clueless, and that was the school. There was nobody else there. There was like the janitor was like the third highest ranking employee of the school. I mean, and now there's like, there just seems to be like insane administrator inflation. I don't know, if you ask me, talking as a cranky old guy, just fire them all and just teach these kids something, for God's sake.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Truly fascinating. Not the response I was expecting.
How would you expect me to tie this into AI, by the way?
No, because I am curious about the specific skills, not how you would restructure the administrative body of a school, but what are the skills that you would focus on to learn and to develop, not about how to use AI, but in complementing your own human development. When you see emotionally healthy people, which our schools are trying to foster emotionally healthy societies.
No, I don't see that happening at all. I don't see that schools are trying to do that at all. I see that they're coddling kids and turning them into emotional invalids. That's all I see. What they should... What they should be doing is saying, okay, now we're going to learn and actually sit there and learn something for like an hour, and then say, now it's recess time. Go out and do whatever the hell you do out there, okay? Instead of like constantly coddling them and telling them that they're okay.
You would have made an extraordinary 11th grade Rebbe. You can only imagine what you would have been like. Malka, I do want to ask you one question, because I think a lot about your work, specifically about how Jewish communities internally learned about one another. And one thing that I've been looking at, the possibility of AI, and really in the larger project of 1840, is facilitating not information, but facilitating experience, so people know the different possibilities of what Jewish life can in fact be. Can you share a little bit historically about how Jews and the fascination, or even the motivation, if it was at all, wanting to learn not texts of the Torah, but learning about other Jews live who they did not have access to?
Once again, David does not provide questions in advance. So, no, I'm just kidding. So yes, Jews have always been intrigued by the Jews who live beyond, and reached out to those other communities using the latest technology. And sometimes it was technology itself that was a point of contention, and those communities that had more advanced, first of all, more resources in general, none of this is going to surprise anyone here, but the more affluent communities, the communities that had more resources and also more religious leadership tended to use technology to be more paternalistic and to use technology and letter writing specifically to reach out to other communities and try to argue for what might be a normative practice of Judaism. And this use of technology, of course, is not limited to Jews and Judaism. And one of the questions that I have for you, David, is to what extent is any of this, don't worry, I'll answer it rhetorically
I'll be
in a second.
asking the questions around here. No.
To what extent is any of this really specific to Judaism? When we talk about, is Judaism ready to face AI, a lot of the talk yesterday especially presumed a level of Jewish exceptionalism and singularity that I'm just not convinced. Yes, of course, the Jewish people have a particular set of scriptures and a particular set of values and shared experiences and history, and I'm not here to deny that. But at the same time, I'm also not convinced that other communities are experiencing these questions, especially communities of faith, that make them less equipped or better equipped to deal with this. And I'll give one historical example, since you asked about history. In the 1st century BCE, there were 2 major libraries. Most people only know about one, and that's the Library of Alexandria. But in fact, there was a huge library in Pergamum. And the Pergamum Library was trying to compete with the Alexandrian Library, and they were producing as many texts as they could. They used papyrus, they used paper, and they needed the papyrus of Egypt to produce their books. And so they were importing all this papyrus. They were buying paper from Alexandria, from Egypt, until Alexandrian authorities said, what are we doing? We're selling paper to our competitors in Pergamum who are using it to put together these books and enhance their gorgeous library, which is a symbol of knowledge, which is a symbol of power, which is a symbol of authority. We don't want to do that. We want to have the best library and the best museum, so we're no longer importing paper to Pergamum. And what happened in Pergamum is that they said, that's fine, we're going to start to process our own paper, we're going to find a workaround, and we are going to find alternate sources of papyrus, and they did that. And today, the truth is, my analogy doesn't totally hold because we still all know Alexandria as being the better library, but Pergamum essentially went off and became siloed socially and intellectually and produced its own orbit of intellectual production. And they had their own museum with their own sources of paper. Now, what's the nimshal? I'm not sure exactly. I'm going to get there. What's the meaning of this story is that I think that sometimes we can weaponize these new technologies in a way that works against ourselves. And we have to be very careful to keep those higher ideals and values at the foreground as we think about these new developments which are taking place so quickly. If our goal is to maintain a global community, to strengthen connection, to build stronger bonds with one another, then we have to be very careful. There was some talk earlier today about whether there should be a Jewish chat GPT. Now, that might solve some interesting questions in the short term, but in the long term, what does that do to further silo the Jewish community or the particular Jewish organizations working on that particular chat or AI model? What does that do to those broader relationships? David, I forgot your question.
I very much appreciate that, but to answer the question that you posed at me, and before we turn over to questions, my answer for Jewish exceptionalism, particularly as it relates to AI, is a one-word answer, and it is Shabbos. I genuinely believe to my absolute core that the Shabbos observant Jewish community, the fact that we have managed, it is 2025, and we have elderly, middle-aged, young children who have grown up with the experience of Shabbos, to know how novel that is for the world, that you read op-eds every 6 months in the New York Times and the Washington Post about people saying, wouldn't it be amazing if we just unplugged for a little bit? Wouldn't it be amazing if we tried to? And we have lived communities. It is not just the pious, it is not just the righteous, where we are actually fostering an ethic where we remove ourselves from technology, We still engage with it. We still work with it during the week, but we have a day where we really just focus on being and our own humanity. To me, I really think is the prototype and the reason why I genuinely believe to my core that the Jewish community should not only be a part of this conversation, but should be leading the conversation, because we remember and we have every single week a reminder of life as it could have been otherwise. So that's really 100% my answer. We do have time, and of course, questions. We'll begin with...
Okay, this was an excellent panel. Thank you so much. In terms of qualities, and Malka, you touched on this a bit, but I'm interested in it from a bit of a different angle. The quality of humility and of patience. I come from this really with a focus on human flourishing, human development, child development, soul formation. When we are raising children in the AI era, thinking of what the day-to-day experience looks like for our kids, compared to the pre-digital age, right? So even just the visual aesthetic of growing up around a life of books, of shelves, of seeing libraries, of seeing a Beit Midrash, that evokes humility, of seeing people around you read and read lengthy books and getting through the book to the last page, of learning from wise teachers who've gone through sequence and mastery and shinun and failure and trial and failure and achievement. This is something that deeply concerns me and is the focus of a lot of the work that I do at Tikvah, is thinking about how to marry our current age to an educational vision, which very often, to me, truthfully, seems completely incompatible to raise children outside of a culture of books, outside of a culture of wise sages. Is this a question? I don't know, but I'd love for you to elaborate more on kind of this culture of instant gratification. The patience is disappearing for children. They can't even wait long enough for Alexa to answer them, let alone look up something in an encyclopedia, which they don't even know what that is. And then just more generally, kind of humility as a deeply Jewish value, and humility, I think, as something very deeply human. What is happening to that? And I'd love your comments.
I already spoke a little bit about this, so I'll turn to my panelists, but I'll just say in terms of gratification, I don't think that there's a binary between this generation or older generations who remember the time before and children. When I was a kid and I did read a lot, I always started with the last page, always, every single time. I know, it's terrible, but I would just go, I remember reading the last page of 1984 and being like, well, that was a waste. But then I read the whole book. I mean, somehow I still did it. And even to this day, and it's a bad habit, I always read the last page. So in terms of that gratification and impatience, I assume that past generations have had their workarounds as well. But I totally agree with you that the pleasure is in the process, and that children are not going to learn that in the same way using technology. But I want to pass it on to my panelists.
Yeah, I mean, to really build on what you're saying, I see like that, I think that word, the process, is the learning. And so how do we, as educators, take children through that process? Especially, look, you can't dictate what a child's home life is like, right? So you don't know, some parents are deciding to be screen-free, right? But some parents can be giving their kids a lot of screen time. We don't know. But it's school. What if school were a place where we were taking kids through a deliberate process? And, you can use digital tools. I don't think we should be afraid of them. Bring the AI in, bring other, digital tools into the classroom, but show them that there's a process. I mean, even taking like the idea of failure, right? That is a skill that kids need to learn. And the test taking, right, is not the way that they learn it, because then they learn like this is the grade and that's it. But what does it mean to like iterate on something, right? And be slow and, as you said, deliberate. So yeah, I think that there's like a huge opportunity even for us to, rethink how we're doing things, and to make sure our rooms are filled with books, right? We know that kids will read if they don't even have to see you reading, right? There's studies done on this, right? All they need to see is books around them, and they will read.
Yeah, I mean, I think kids should not get anywhere near screens until they're at least like 14 years old or something like that. My kids are now grown; they have their own kids, and they hardly use smartphones even. I mean, and I achieved this, by the way, if you want to know the trick, by setting an extremely bad example. Because I'm a techie, I've had my face in screens like all the time, and I think my kids at some point said, we don't want to be that guy. So I just lucked out that way. But yes, I think it's very important to all these skills that you're talking about. If kids develop them until they're whatever appropriate age in their early teens, then it's probably less terrible for them to get on screens after that.
I just want to say something before we get to the next question. Just two things. A, I've always found it fascinating that the way that the Talmud articulates learning is literally through failure, where the Talmud in Tractate Gittin says, Ein Adam Omed al Divrei Torah Elam Kein Nichshel Bahem, that you cannot stand up, you cannot have your footing on the ground vis-a-vis Torah unless you first have failed, unless you first suffered, unless you first were disappointed and you didn't get it. That's the only way to arrive at learning. I will say, and I'm gonna mention this again because I am raising young kids, and to my own horror, all of the systems that we have, my kids see plenty of screens every single day, every single morning, to the point where my 3-year-old started calling me Daddy Pig after a little too much Peppa the Pig in the morning. And that certainly, as a Jewish parent, was not a victory when my son started referring to me to Daddy Pig. But I will say something. My wife and I put in a lot of effort in the way that we educate and introduce Shabbos, where we make Shabbos something that is so undeniably awesome. We brought back Shabbos parties. I grew up with people having Shabbos parties. My kids wake up every Shabbos morning, and there are cupcakes out for them. There's cake out for them. Thank God we live in a neighborhood where their friends and the backyards are always open. I have so much confidence, and I am such a long-term Shabbos optimist that I feel like a lot of parenting needs to shift into how do you introduce the notion of Shabbos to your kids. And it's really interesting because when we first introduce it, when they're 3, they freak out. They don't like Shabbos. They're like, no, oh no. And we're not afraid of that conversation. I've had conversations with every one of my children. Why are you scared about Shabbos coming? And it's always, we don't get to watch TV. So what do you get to do? What do we have differently? Am I ever on my computer? Am I ever at work? And we really put in a great deal of our parenting into transforming Shabbos, not just into a fun and exciting time, but as an educational experience.
Can I piggyback on what you said just now? Sure. Because also we've been talking a lot about what ChatGPT can create better than maybe what we can create, right? And how the whole notion of creativity has to be rethought, but it's not, because what you're saying is Shabbos isn't just about what you're not doing. How do we create Shabbos? AI can't do that for us because it's not one thing. It's coming down the stairs and smelling the cholent. Right, you can't recreate those. So think about that, right? Ken Robinson talks about things like anesthetic experiences, things that put us to sleep, and aesthetic, right, where we're woken up. And what you're saying is, how do we create a religion where we are waking up and creating, right?
It's
our
why
experience.
from the very beginning, it's a strange part of 1840, but a part of what we do has always been around books related to Shabbos. We run an account called Shabbos Reads, which is just sharing what different people online read on Shabbos. And I've been working with influencers. We just want you to share what you read on Shabbos. And thank God, we have Harvard law professors. We've had a couple celebrities here and there. All we want you to do is share the cover of the book you read on Shabbos after Shabbos. But that's a way of building culture. It's not teaching young little kids, though people do share their children's books. We need to reintroduce Shabbos to ourselves. How do we make Shabbos something exciting that we're looking forward to?
All right, so plugging right into this big Shabbos energy and noting that Moshe Koppel did not answer the question about the Asifa straightforward. I want to connect to the Asifa. I think about this a lot. I'm so glad you asked this because I was one of the morons who chuckled, when the Rabbonim were like, no, internet, this is bad. I think about this Asifa, if not daily, then certainly weekly, with great shame, because it strikes me that they were more right than wrong. Now, my question, and I understand full well the implications of, we can't just set new technologies aside, and I understand full well their uses. I ask this not necessarily by way of just provocation, but really as a kind of a philosophical exercise. Is resistance possible? Can we go full Shabbos mode and say, look, as a community, this thing which we understand has good, it is more terrible than good. It will lead to some kind of destruction. We are out of this story.
I don't think so, honestly. I think that Shabbos is just one example of a way in which Jews have already developed tools for dealing with the coming crisis before that crisis even existed. I want to give you two more examples, okay? So one of the things I'm worried about, as I said, is intellectual outsourcing, right? We depend on this thing. Conveniently, we actually have a tradition of arguing, right? I think that's going to serve us well. The idea that learning for its own sake, right, is a value, and that we have a tradition of, right, machlokas between Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, Abaye, Rava, Rav and Shmuel, et cetera, right? And thinking about the kinds of moral dilemmas that are right around the corner for us, I think serves us well. I just want to mention as an aside, autonomous vehicles, which is going to be a big deal very soon, raise all kinds of moral dilemmas because you need to program in trolley problems, right? I mean, what do? Your car's going there, and the car needs to be programmed in advance to deal with a situation in which it can either, kill one person this way or 5 people that way, and oddly enough, trolley problems, most people think they were invented by Philippa Foot in a paper in the British Journal of Philosophy in 1963, or Judith Jarvis Thompson. They were invented by the Chazon Ish. Okay, the Chazon Ish died in 1953. For those who don't know, look up in his Chidushim on Sanhedrin, Siman Chaf Hey. He absolutely invents trolley problems. Okay, there's no fat man being pushed off the bridge, but essentially everything important about the trolley problems are already in the Chazon Ish. That's just one example. We have a tradition of dealing with moral dilemmas, arguing about them, thinking about them. I think we are in a very good position when it comes to the fear of completely outsourcing our, moral and intellectual thought. That's number one. But another example, I was talking about, we won't have anything to do and we won't find meaning in our jobs. This is a real problem. But it so happens that there is another old Jewish institution for batlanim, right? It's called the Kollel, right? Now the Kollel, people dump on the Kollel because there are all kinds of negative aspects to it. But the fact of the matter is that the Kollel really does anticipate a society in which there's so much leisure that people will not find meaning through their professions, but rather find meaning through learning Lishma. Okay, that is an institution which will serve us very well, right? It won't serve everybody very well, as you well know. Olam Haba is where tzaddikim go and learn uninterrupted 24/7, and it's exactly the same thing for everybody else, right? So the Gehenna is exactly the same thing for everybody else. So the point is that if we adapt the Kollel model, adapt the Shabbos model, adapt the learning model, we will head off a lot of the problems that we're facing.
Do we have time for one more question? Stephen?
Alrighty. So we've done a lot of talking about how the Jewish community is particularly situated in facing these questions and how we can be in positions ourselves and through our communities we're able to face it. I'm wondering if we can move the conversation explicitly outward. My background is in really 2 parallel fields, Kiruv and marketing, which are really the same field, and I'm happy to discuss why that is. But when I think about these questions, I think as someone who grew up outside of Jewish schools, outside of an Orthodox Jewish community, and embraced it, what I consider later on, what most people consider very, very early on average, is how can we communicate this message to those outside of our community to maximize the positive that I can do in the face of AI for everyone else who does not have these advantages built in already?
I'll just talk about the Shabbos piece. I genuinely believe that we have a very real responsibility to model what a Shabbos observant life can be, and particularly something that I've tried to do, and we did very early on in 1840, do a series on Shabbos, which is to model what I would call a accessible Shabbos possibility, which is actually not highlighting the strictest Shabbos observant communities, but highlighting communities where I have family members that observe Shabbos in a way that maybe your local Orthodox rabbi wouldn't be thrilled, he wouldn't hold it up as an example, but realizing the diversity of practice that we have in our community can now be our greatest advantage in figuring out where that ambiguous threshold is that allows you to have a genuine Shabbos experience. I always believe in kind of starting inwards and slowly moving outwards, and I think that if the Jewish community preserves its own humanity and stands up as a model of humanity in our discourse, in the way that we discuss, the way that we argue, the way that we talk about ideas, I generally believe that we're going to be in very great shape, and we're going to naturally be a model for the world, because the world is right now looking for models. The whole world is scouring. Does anybody have this figured out? And I think it's a very interesting moment to be a part of a community that to some degree has figured some of this out, some of what it means to be alive, some of the great mystery of existence. And I really have a great measure. I wouldn't call myself an optimist or a pessimist. In this regard, I'm just confident. I'm very confident in the tradition and the life and the way that we approach the question of existence. We have something very real, and I think modeling that for the world without like in an evangelical or like in a marketing way, I think people are beginning to take notice and are going to notice even more in a very organic way.
I think also is, you know, we've talked a lot internally about our own Jewish experience, but we are citizens of a country, and we know that the educational system in this country is also broken, right? So how can we work together? How can we be good citizens and create, as you said, our own models, and then share and say, I mean, we could be leading the charge in solving, right, some of societal's ills. I think we should be, right? We have so much to contribute to American society. So I love your question, because it really demands of us to say, like, what can I do to help fix this, right? Because in so many ways, it's not just AI, right? We know there's so many problems. So I love that. I would love to see that sort of, you know, civic responsibility in what we're doing. Everyone will benefit.
Sure. I would just add that I think a lot of what we're talking about right now concerns what does it take to create a community. And what we're finding is that across religious practice and faiths, people are agreeing that it is very hard or impossible to build genuine, authentic communities through a screen. And what AI can do, I think, is present a false sense of community, but really it's narcissism when you're engaging with a robot. And I was telling our group yesterday about this New Yorker article last week by Patricia Marks, that there's hundreds of thousands of people right now who are in the process of marrying their chatbots, and they're in millions of people are in romantic relationships with them, and they're able to curate their personalities to correspond exactly to what they would imagine would be an ideal partner. But that really is narcissism, because you can't get beyond your own preferences, your own imagination. And a real community, I think, and I think this is where Judaism maybe isn't unique, but is distinct and does it well, is that Jewish tradition understands that a community is not built based on monolithic ideas. It's built based on conversation, relationship, dialogue, and there's a shared higher purpose. but not monolithic. And in fact, I would say even specifically, it doesn't tolerate monolithic ideas, and it demands tension and discussion and debate. And the shared higher purpose is what keeps us together. It's very, very hard to do that through a screen, and in-person gatherings for reasons that maybe I can't articulate, but in-person gatherings that happen on Shabbos and happen at conferences really take us much farther in terms of community building than what we can accomplish on a screen.
Yeah, I would also say like that is the American experiment as well, right? A pluribus unum, out of many one, and one of the schools we're working with, the driving question of a unit is how do we create the common good? And it's by looking at both American democracy and Israeli democracy, and how do democracies function. I mean, that was a big takeaway of this conference for me, is that the AI models can threaten democracy, can threaten the very things that bring us together like this. So I think we have an extraordinary opportunity here to work together with our fellow citizens.
I cannot thank you enough, each of our panelists, Moshe Koppel, Tikvah, Malka. Thank you all so much. I want to conclude, really this is probably the last time that I'm going to have an opportunity to address everybody here. And I pulled something up that I found genuinely on like a very personal level, incredibly moving. 1840 was started 5 years ago in May of 2020. And when I first was introducing 1840 to somebody outside of myself, Mitch, Dina, and Dovey at the time, I had a public Zoom session where I was talking about this initiative that I honestly myself didn't even know where it would lead or where it would take us, but I knew that we were at a very strange inflection point in Jewish life and Jewish living. And I gave a presentation, and the source sheet still lives on the 1840 website, and it's entitled The End of Religion or Just the Beginning. And the final source I have, and it was Dr. Koppel's words that kind of reminded me of this, the last source on this source sheet, and it's on the website, it's 5 years old, is a quote from Yuval Harari, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And this is what he writes. As robots and AI push humans out of the job market, the ultra-Orthodox may come to be seen as the model of the future rather than a fossil of the past. Not that everyone will become Orthodox Jews and go to yeshiva to study Talmud, but in the lives of all people, the quest for meaning and for community might eclipse the quest for a job. Now, I can't explain to you why this was the concluding point that I had in May of 2020, launching what at that point was just a podcast that was moderately successful. But I do have this feeling that the community that we created, which is not about anything that happened in 2020, but what's ongoing and happening right before us right now, I am so incredibly grateful that this idea of the way that we refashion and think about Jewish life in this ever-changing world is not something that we are doing alone by ourselves, but we have a community for. So really, from the bottom of my heart, each and every participant who came here tonight, and especially our partners at American Security Fund, I am so grateful to every single one of you.